All right. So I know we're a little late here, but up next we have Brett Perlman, who is the CEO for the Center for Houston's Future. And we are really excited to have Mr. Brett Perlman. So, without much further ado, I'm going to hand it off to him. He's going to be talking about how, we as youth can directly start to make change in our communities. So thank you for being with us today, Mr. Perlman. We really appreciate it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you see my slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that means we're pretty much ready to go. Okay, except, oh, there I am. Okay, great. Well, I know it's been a long day, so, and I know I'm probably between you guys, maybe one other speaker in the end of the day. So I'm going to try to make this as entertaining as possible. I had a few things to tell you about the work we do at the Center for Houston's Future, who we are, what we do, and maybe ways that you can get involved, and maybe things that you might want to think about. So I'll try to make this interesting and provocative and rather quick, fast, because I know we're running late. So who are we? We are a nonprofit. We've been in business for about 20 years. And what we do is our job is to bring together business, government, and community stakeholders really to think about the future, to think about what are some of the big issues that we have in Houston and how can we work together to solve them. And so we do that through some big projects we do, which we call strategic initiatives. We do that through a leadership training program, which we've now had 1,200 people go through. And if any of you are interested in that program, talk to me offline. We can tell you more about that. And finally, we do it through things like we're doing today, which we call community engagement. So we go out and talk to people in the community about what's going on in their community and what are some of the things that are affecting them and how can they have an impact. In a lot of our work, we focus on the year 2036. Now, that may seem like a long way away, but if you think about it, and I know many of you guys are still young, we're just born in the year 2000. But if you think about it in your lifetime, between now and the year 2000, say, that is as much time as between now and 2036. So what you've experienced in your lifetimes, we're going to experience just as much change over the next 15 to 20 years. And so that's why we sort of picked that point in time to focus on in our work, because it's a time frame that you guys, as young people, and certainly me as being a little bit older, but I can certainly remember 2000, and I'll show you some of the things that I remember, even though you guys are really probably a little too young to remember them in a second. But I can just envision how much the world has changed in my lifetime and how much it might change going forward. The other reason we focus on 2036 is because, interestingly enough, it's the 200th anniversary of the city of Houston. And so we live in a community that will be 200 years old in 2036. And so it's kind of a nice milestone to celebrate how far we've come in our history as a city. And you'll be seeing us talk a little bit in a second about 1836 and how Houston has changed over the 200 years that we've been a city. Now, what will the world look like in Houston, in 2036? Well, it's going to look very different than it looks today. We're going to be growing from about 6 million people in the region today to about 10 million people in the region. That 10 million people is an interesting number because, as you'll see in a few minutes, that will make us one of the global cities, one of the major metropolitan areas in the world. And so you guys can, if you stay in Houston, have an impact on the direction of where a great global city might head. The other thing that we'll see, and you'll see it in a second in some of the data that I'm going to show you, and I think you already know this, we're going to become a much more diverse city in terms of who we are from a racial and ethnic standpoint, but also from an age standpoint. You guys are really kind of at an interesting time to be turning into adults, because you are at that cusp of these really big changes that we're going to see over the next few years. And so I want to get you to think not only about where we are today, but where we are going to go over the next 15 to 20 years, because this is something that you all are going to be part of and you're going to own as citizens of Houston or citizens of wherever you decide to live. So let's just think about those changes from the time that you were kids till now. And I know some of you may think this is even humorous to think about videotapes or encyclopedias, but it's not. To me, it's not. I mean, I remember a time when we had, we didn't have the cell phones we have today. That we got all our content from VCRs. The idea of driving an electric car was something that you could only see in the movies, and all our information came from encyclopedias rather than from Google. So we live in a completely different world than we do even, a little over 20 years ago. And so the question that we all have to ask ourselves is, what does that future hold? And how can we start to impact what that future starts to look like? Now, predicting the future is kind of difficult. And so I thought these two quotes sort of illustrate that. The consulting firm McKinsey & Company, which is a big management consulting firm that does a lot of these prognostications, said in 1980 that by the year 2000, 20 years in the future, there will only be 900,000 cell phones. And as we know that by 2011, and this number is obviously out of date, cell phone subscribers had passed 5 billion. Effectively, almost everyone in the world has a cell phone now. And then IBM's Thomas Watson, who was the inventor of the computer, said that there may be a world market for maybe 5 computers. And he was saying that in 1943. So predictions are very difficult to make. And then on top of that, we have kind of the last year or so where we've had the pandemic, which has really started, I think, to affect maybe the way we think about the future in some interesting ways. And we'll talk about those today. And so on top of the idea of looking at these future trends, which we'll talk about in a second, we have the impact of the pandemic, which in some ways has made the future move a little bit faster than it otherwise may have made it. It's made it seemed more urgent to address some of the things that we're starting to see in our world, whether that's climate change or health disparities or immigration. These are all issues that we know now have to be addressed with urgency. I think that we have seen the impact of and the need for social justice. So we understand now that crises affect marginalized groups, and that we have to start thinking about this world as a world in which we have to address equity as well as some of the underlying trends that we're seeing. It's interesting that I think, crises create opportunities. So I think what we're starting to see, and we saw it, if any of you remember Hurricane Harvey, we saw lots of opportunities for changes when these big events occur. And so I think one of the lessons from the pandemic is there could be an opportunity to move fast here, to accelerate change in ways that we couldn't do before. And so coming up with innovative solutions to some of these pressing problems that we're going to discuss in a minute, I think is one of the opportunities the pandemic has brought us. The idea of transparency, that we have to basically look at the facts, that not everybody's entitled to their own facts, that data is important and that trends are important. And I think everything that's happened in the last 6 months has only sort of reinforced this idea of transparency and of fact-based planning. So looking at how the data, where the data is taking us is important. And then finally, collaboration. We have to do this together. There's no such thing as doing this in silos. We can't be successful unless we're developing collaborative solutions. So those are some of the things I think we've learned. And, there are a number of areas that I think we've become concerned about and that we need to start to think about change over the next couple of years. So what are some of those trends? And I'll talk about each of these in turn in this little talk. I'll talk a little bit about climate change. I'll talk about this idea of globalization and urbanization. I'll talk about healthcare disparities. Now, this wasn't even in the speech I give that I'm giving you today. A year ago, when I was doing this speech, I did the same speech to a group of parents at Spring Branch High School, and I didn't even mention this. So this just shows you how fast things are changing. The role of technology, I think you guys know this, how technology is affecting us. And we started to see some of the impacts of not having technology, for example, in terms of broadband, and how important it is to think about having access to not only to the internet, but to high-speed internet connections. And we used to think about broadband connectivity as something that, only affect the lack of it really only affected rural parts of the state. But now we know that it's as big a problem in urban areas as it is in other places. And then finally, you guys are entering a time where we're going to see a big shift in the way you're educated for the future and the jobs of the future. And so that's something that you ought to be thinking about in terms of your education going forward. And I may give you a few tips at the end on how to think about some of those trends. Now, I know that there have been things in the chat, so I'm going to see what has come up. If any of you guys have questions, I'm happy to take them as we go through. So just feel free to drop things in the chat as we talk here. So what I'm going to do in this talk for the rest of the time is really talk about these trends we're starting to see. And the first one is climate change. Now, I've been looking at climate change for a long time, and something that I have been working on in my at the center and in my prior life. I previously served as a public policy maker, and as way back as 2016, we were wondering whether we should be panicking about climate change. And the MIT Technology Review published this cover, which I thought was kind of cool, that said, maybe we should be panicked, but maybe not quite yet. But by 2019, the New York Times basically said, yes, it's time to panic. That we are warming our planet in a catastrophic way, and that we have to address this as an urgent problem that we have to address now. So in the space of 2 or 3 years, I think opinion has changed greatly. Climate change is here. It's affecting us all. It's something that we have to, you and your generation is going to own and have to worry about. And so what do I mean by that? Here's a chart that's kind of interesting, and you can kind of see where we are. Here's the current trend in carbon emissions, and here's where we were supposed to go under the Paris Accord. And if you can look at this, and this idea of the Paris Accord was really to sort of keep within either 1.5 or 2 degrees C going forward. So you can see that we're well off what we thought we were going to be doing when the Paris Accord was signed a while back. And so this problem, if anything, has even become more urgent and more important to address. And we at the Center for Houston's Future are kind of in the middle of this. And so I just thought I'd talk for a second about some of our work, because as we all know, Houston is an oil and gas capital. We're the, sometimes think of ourselves as the energy capital of the world, but really what we are is we're the oil and gas capital. But we think at the center that Houston has an opportunity really to lead this transition in climate change. And a lot of the work we're doing focuses on how we might do that. And while I won't get into the details, we've published some reports, and you can see them on our website with the University of Houston on ways we might do that going forward. And so actually, I think Houston has a real role to play in becoming a low carbon energy capital, but it's going to have to take steps. And this is the stuff that you guys are really going to be responsible for going forward. My generation can get this started, but your generation is the generation that's going to have to make this a reality. And there's lots that we can do. Houston can be a leader in this, but we're going to have to think very, very differently about our future and about the way that the role that energy plays in our future. So I wouldn't say that you need to panic right now, but I would say you need to take action. And I know that A lot of people, young people in particular, are concerned about climate change, and it's a great issue for you to get involved in. And there's lots of ways to get involved in it through groups like this, for example. Some of the work you're doing today, those are just ways to start affecting your community. And if you look at our website at the Center for Houston's Future, you'll see other ideas that we have in some of the work that we've done. So the second trend I want to tell you about a little bit is where we're going in the world. You know, the world is moving fast. We're moving from a world of about 4 billion people today in your lifetimes, to a world of over 8 billion people. And those people are also, on the move. They're moving into urban areas. And we'll see how the pandemic has been impacting that in a minute, and how this trend has been affecting it. But I think this is a trend that we've seen that people are becoming more urban. They're moving to global centers. As I mentioned, Houston will be one of those global centers with 10 million people by the year 2040. And so urbanization is a big trend in terms of how we're going to think about our world going forward in lots of different ways. And so here's a picture of what that urban landscape might look like across the globe. And as you can see, we already have, as you well know, a number of big urban centers. You know, we have Los Angeles and New York and Mexico City and Buenos Aires and places in Europe and Africa. And of course, China has a number of large cities with over 10 million people, as does India. But what we're starting to see is that the world is going to come, by 2030, will become more dense, that there will be more of these large urban populations. And this will obviously have a huge impact on the way we think about where we live, how we move, about climate change, about the way we address health. And so urbanization is a huge trend that we're facing. Now, to think about this in the context of Houston, I thought I might show you this kind of picture. And this picture was run in a paper back as I mentioned, in 1836. And in a newspaper in New York, in which it said that there is no place, let's see if I can read the whole quote here, I'll move you guys over a little bit. There's no place in Texas more healthy, having abundance of excellent spring water, enjoying a sea breeze, is handsome and beautifully elevated, salubrious, whatever that means, and well watered. Anyone want to guess where this is? It's not Austin. This was the town of Houston in 1836. It was put in the paper by the Allen brothers, who were the founders of Houston. They were also a bit of real estate promoters to try to get people to move to Houston. And move they did. So this is the start of your city back, almost 200 years ago.
Is that what Houston actually looked like at one point, or no?
Houston never looked like that.
That's what I was about to say.
Houston looked like that. Houston was that was the whole point. That was not Houston. That was just some hucksters. We didn't have, think about a time when you didn't have photos. All you had was drawings. And so people in New York saw that picture and they said, wow, I'd like to move there. And what they were really moving to was this. They were moving to this small rural community that was basically mosquito infested at the intersection of 3 bayous that had a tendency to flood. And I don't know if any of you have walked in downtown Houston or by Allen's Landing. If you ever have a chance, it's really interesting to do so, because you can kind of still get a feel of what Houston must have been like, back in the 1800s. You can see that Houston was actually a port city, and you can see the riverboat there. This is what Houston looked like. It was very small, a few small blocks, and some of that, not much of that exists anymore. Obviously, we've torn a lot of that down. But some of those buildings still do exist, and you can walk down there by Allen's Landing if you ever have a chance, or take there's a motorboat cruise that takes you by there, and it's very interesting to go see. So that was the founding of the city in 1973, and no one really expected Houston to become what it has become. In fact, in 1978, which may seem like a long time for you guys, but it's certainly in my lifetime, I was just your age. Actually, I was just graduating high school. This is a picture of what downtown Houston looked like. And so lots of parking lots, not very dense, a few big buildings. And then, fast forward 20 years. This is what it looked like in 2011. I need to get a picture of 2020, 2021, so you could see what it looks like 20 years later. But you can basically see the outlines of a modern city starting to emerge. And so Houston has changed quite a bit, over the last 20 years, much less the last 200 years. And so we are in the middle ourselves of this big demographic shift. And so I thought I'd just sort of illustrate that and give you another illustration of what that might look like. So just watch this map and notice that the population density over there, the areas that are kind of maroon colored, watch the shift in that population density. This is what some demographers think Houston might look like, or a few years ago thought Houston might look like going forward. So that's the year 2000. And you can see that was 2015. So that was actually real data. And you can see how it's sort of starting to spread out. And then we got to what people thought it might look like in 2025. And you can see how denser it's getting and how it's starting to spread out and, move beyond Beltway 8 and the Grand Parkway. Maybe even some of you live in some of these places. I used to think about Katy as being, another city. Katy's really part of Houston now in some ways. It's dense all the way out. And then, what people think it might look like in terms of the density by 2050. And so you can see how Houston is growing. We're a growing city, a young city, and that population taking us to 10 million looks like we're going to become a much more dense city, but also a much more spread out city. So this is a big trend and it will have major implications. And this is kind of what we thought might happen before the pandemic. But look at this. This is really interesting data too. I just took this off the internet today because look what's happened in the last year and how that's affected this trend. You've seen Harris County lose major, pretty significant population, and places like Liberty and Austin County, which are really far out, start to expand even more. And so, the question will be, what does Houston look like going forward, and how has the pandemic altered some of these trends that we've been seeing over the last 20 or 30 years? Do we go back to being a less dense place, or how is this going? So, so anyway, that's where we're headed. And Alexander says, feeling when a city is dense, but also young. Yeah, that's exactly right. And you'll see that in a second. Hold on, and I'll show you that. So that's kind of the second trend I want to talk to you about, is this idea of, what densification and urbanization are going to do. And we'll start to talk a little bit about some of the impacts of that, maybe in this next section, where we talk about health and healthcare. Now, we all know that healthcare has been a big part of our city's growth over the last many years. In fact, we did a study, which you see published here, and we just released it last year, which said many of you folks are going to be working in healthcare if you stay in Houston. In fact, 1 in 4 jobs in the Houston region is going to be in the healthcare sector. So healthcare, if you're thinking about what your career might be, is a really great sector to think about, particularly if you're interested in staying in Houston. The thing that our research also showed, however, is that healthcare is has this interesting dichotomy, because we have, the Texas Medical Center and we have world-class healthcare in Houston, yet we lead the nation in the rate of uninsured residents. And we have this negative feedback loop between our rising healthcare costs and uninsured individuals. And so when we studied this, we started looking at this before the pandemic. And then you'll see in a second some of the impact the pandemic has had on these trends, because these feedback loops between uninsured people and people don't have good health care or have chronic health conditions what we started to realize is this isn't just a problem for them, and it is a serious problem for them, but it's actually a problem for us all. And you'll start to see that in some of the data. So let's see if I can get this to move to the next slide. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Let's see if I can get the slides to work a little bit better. Okay, let me try again. Okay. Okay, sometimes I have this. Yeah. So this is what we were seeing in Houston, and I think it's a big issue, is that we have a huge percentage of our population, higher than the national percentage, which remain lacking healthcare coverage, and that's sort of the basics that you need for health, right? You need to have access to good health insurance in order to have access to good healthcare. And in fact, what we're starting to see is that it affects your age group, pretty much more than anyone else. So that age group of 19 to 25 or 26 to 34, as you guys start to mature into those age groups, those are the age groups where it affects this growing population. As I think as was mentioned before, Houston is a very young city, so that's why it has even more impact. By the time you get older, like my age, it's becoming less of a problem just because of Medicaid and things like that. So this is kind of what we're facing in terms of issues that we have in healthcare. And, this affects also, basically it affects these disparities and lack of access to healthcare cause problems for people in terms of not only their healthcare, but their health. And those are separate but similar things. So you can think of not having a house or not being able to come up with an emergency payment, as health problem, or having food insecurity. Those really are not just economic problems; those are health problems too. Because if you can't have a good meal or find a good meal, or you don't have money to pay for a doctor, or you don't have access to a good house, you're going to have problems, chronic conditions like asthma and diabetes, and those are going to contribute to these health disparities. So this problem of not having access to health insurance is actually a bigger problem than just, not being able to go to the doctor. It actually affects the health of each of our citizens. And we have, because of the health crisis that we have in Houston, we have these bigger, what are called social determinants of health type of issues. So where you are in the economic ladder depends on how healthy you are. Now, I think people kind of knew this before the pandemic, but what the pandemic did, and this is some data I just got today actually from Harris County, is it really started to bring home the impact of some of these disparities. Because what we see is these disparities start to affect people of color primarily. And you can see in the middle there, the purple color are the number of how the pandemic has affected these, communities of color, particularly Blacks and Hispanics, and how it's had a disproportionate impact. And so the lack of healthcare, the impact of chronic conditions, the impact of the pandemic, all are combining to create this sort of crisis in our healthcare system that we're going to have to address. And so you can start to see the impact of some of these trends that if we don't start to address them, are going to become big problems for us. And interestingly enough, I just pulled this map as well, and it's even affecting us today. So this is a map of where the provider centers were for enrollment for the vaccine. And as you can see, I don't have the map, but take my word for it. A lot of the east side of Houston is where people have lower income areas, have these higher penetrations of chronic health conditions. And unfortunately, we're seeing less, opportunities for enrollment in the vaccine. And so all these problems sort of pancake on one another. and are problems that we are going to have to address. So thinking about it's not just about your health or my health, it's really about all of our health. And we have to start thinking about this as a community differently. And that's some of the work that we're doing at the Center for Houston's Future to start doing some of that thinking about how do we make our community healthy, not just think about us as individuals. The third sort of major trend I'd like to talk to you about is, and it was mentioned before, is how immigration is affecting our community, and the fact that we are becoming, we are already viewed as one of the most diverse cities in the country, and the impact of immigration is going to, as it plays out in Houston, is going to affect not only our region, but really the rest of the U.S., because it's going to start to affect how other cities start to grow. So getting how we deal with immigrants, whether they're undocumented immigrants or people who have come from other countries, through a legal system, how we deal with that is going to be very important, not only to our own country in terms of our growth, but will be important as a model for the rest of the country. And you can start to see how this is impacting, how it's been playing out in Houston over the last 50 years. Houston in the 1960s and 70s, if you look at the trends, was primarily a white, middle-class city. And if you look there, you can kind of see, let's see if I can get all the data up here. Oops. You can see in the blue there, those are Anglos. And then you can start to see how the population has shifted over time to become much more racially diverse. And this is just 2016 data. If you were to look at these trends have only increased. And so why is this important? Because really, being a city that on the move and a city that's growing, we have to make our community welcoming to immigrants. And you can start to see why here, because it used to be that we grew through domestic migration. People used to come to Houston in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, from the Rust Belt, right? From all over the US for those good paying oil and gas jobs. Well, those days are over. What people are coming now for is people are coming from all over the world, and you can start to see the impact of international migration because they believe that Houston still was a good place, and maybe to be in that healthcare field or maybe still in energy. But you can see that international migration has become really the driver of our population growth. So if we're going to continue to grow as a community, we have to make ourselves into a magnet for people coming to be part of the Houston story. And just here's another version of the same idea, where you can see that what has really driven the growth in our community is people coming from all over the world to be part of what is a dynamic, growing city. And this is important, I think, because what it means is that immigrants are really hold the future to our nations, to our cities, and perhaps even our nation's growth prospects. And getting this transition right so that we are attractive to people from all over the world is important, because they will be the ones holding our jobs, in 2036. Already today, about a third of our workforce are made up of immigrants, and by 2036, that will be over 40%. So not surprisingly, given the demographic changes that we're seeing, our growth, immigrants are the key for our growth story. And so we have to start thinking differently as a city and as a country about how we make ourselves a welcoming community for immigration. So that's the third trend. And then the fourth trend is this idea of technology and investing in new technologies, because as we know, and as you guys are well aware, technologies are really the future. That machines are getting better and better at doing things that humans used to do, at things like translating languages. We all have Google Translate. Writing high school essays. No, some of your teachers won't be happy about this, but machines may be better at doing that than people taking the SAT. Driving a truck, working in retail. We've already seen some of these slides. This may even seem quaint, given kind of what's happened since the pandemic, and given the changes that we've already seen. So that's how the world's accelerating already, that the changes that we have seen have just been really accelerated by the pandemic. And so the impact of that is going to have a big impact on you guys as you think about where you're going in your future, because what it means is that education is going to become much more important than it has been in the past. It used to be that people could get along without having a high school degree, believe it or not, or maybe even a GED or some college. And you can see that as automation becomes a trend, that's going to be less likely going forward. That we're going to start to see huge amounts of job loss due to automation going forward. So the best thing that you can do, and I'll talk about this in a second, for your own careers is obviously not only to stay in school, but to go to college, get that bachelor's degree, and then if you are so inclined, move on to some sort of professional degree. So this is the way that your generation is going to need to think about the economy. We're in a knowledge-based economy that's moving quickly with a lot of rapidly changing trends. And really the thing that's going to make a difference for you all is education. That's the one thing that that you can't take, that is going to be able to, your ability to learn new things, to think in new ways, to work collaboratively. Those are all trends that are going to be key to your future going forward. Let's see. I just put this slide in just to talk about the impact of the pandemic on some of this. I think what we've also discovered is that broadband is almost as important as having a computer. And what you can see here, the purple areas are the areas which don't have, in this chart, don't have a good adoption rate of broadband. And probably won't surprise you that those are some of the same areas that are affected by the pandemic, which are lower income, which have health disparities. And so having access to broadband going forward will be certainly an important trend. We used to think that limits in broadband were not problems for urban areas, only problems for rural areas. And I think what the pandemic has shown, as we've all had to work at home or go to school from home, is that broadband is really one of the drivers of being able to be successful going forward. So just to conclude, I'm going to I love this quote, and this was from an article in 2019 by a writer I like a lot, Tom Friedman, who writes in the New York Times. And what he suggested to you all, which I think is true, is the two codes that you guys need to know. And those codes are the Constitution and how to code. And, it's interesting that he was writing this a couple of years ago, because I think the first code, knowledge of the Constitution, certainly without, being too political about this, certainly our democracy has been tested in the last couple of years. And so all you guys, as citizens of Houston, as citizens of the country, need to understand how our country works and understand more about how our government works. And so it's not good enough anymore just to think that this isn't your problem. It's all of our issues to understand how that code works. But also you have to understand these newer codes, how computers work and how that's going to shape your environment. So if I were in your shoes today, these are the two codes I would be looking to know in terms of what I would be doing in terms of shaping my future. And then just to finally close off, I think the way we think about what it's going to take to be successful in the future is going to look a little bit different than it's looked in the past. We used to think that it was the leader who made the decisions, the Abraham Lincolns, the great man. Now we realize it's really all of us. It's collaboration. It's working together. We used to think that creativity came from the sole genius, and like Einstein, and now we realize that it's really the wisdom of teams that make creativity work. And finally, we used to think of intelligence as IQ, as just being smart, but now we realize that it's more EQ. It's both intellect and emotional intelligence, and knowing how to work with people, knowing those soft skills, as well as those hard skills, is really the key, I think, to your success going forward. So I know I've hit you with a lot, but maybe that will give you a sense. And why do we study 2036? It's really because of this guy and you all, because this is the class of 2036. This is a friend of mine's baby who was born a year and a half ago. And I think what this baby stands for is not only the future that he's going to inherit, but the future that you guys are going to shape for him going forward. So it's not only my responsibility to start this ball moving, but it's my responsibility to pass it off to you all as young leaders, really to take this forward so that we can ensure that this guy here by 2036 inherits a world perhaps that's better than the world we have today. So I'll just leave it at that. And I don't know if we have time for questions, or there are a few things in the chat, but happy to answer any questions, or certainly have any. Oh, and there's the Tom Friedman thing. Someone just gave you some homework in the chat to read it. Thank you for being late, which is a great book of his. So anyway, hopefully this was at least a view into the future of where the world might be going, and hopefully it was a little bit provocative and some things that you guys as young people can start to think about in terms of the things that you might want to focus on and how you might want to start to influence where we're heading as a city, a region, and a country, if not a world. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Perlman. The presentation was great. I think completely wrapping it up at the end and kind of filling it with those two types of codes that we need to know is really important. And I think we can answer some questions until 5, and then we'll just start the awards at 5. So I think I think I asked a question, and my question was about like the transition from oil and gas to green energy. And the reason I asked that is because, you know, some kids' parents might work in oil and gas. And I think a lot of people are scared that, you know, if we, you know, continue, like if we completely kill off the oil and gas jobs, they'll lose their jobs. And, you know, how does that trend look if we just completely move to oil, like green energy? And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because, you know, that's something you've been studying for a while.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Well, I think it's we're in an interesting time. I could talk about that for hours. But you know, Houston is an interesting city because we lost 60,000 jobs, if you guys read the paper, in the last year from the downturn, not only from the pandemic in the energy industry, but also from the downturn in oil. And it is having an impact. I got a call yesterday from a friend a friend of a friend whose husband was a welder and just got laid off. And the question is, where am I going to find another job? And those are concerns. But I think what we're going to see is that the future could be as bright as the past was, that some of these newer industries are going to create some of those same jobs. And so while I think it is of a concern, I think we have some real opportunities in front of us in Houston to be at the forefront. And I think really there's no going back to the past. You know, we can't stop the world from moving forward. And we know we have to address climate change. And so the question is how do we, as a community, as a city, as an industry, how do we do that? And so we're starting to put some ideas out there. And not surprisingly, it comes down to having the right skills and being innovative. And I think it's not a zero-sum sort of equation. We can both have a growing economy and solve the climate challenge as well if we do this smart. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be bumps in the road, and that this isn't going to be painful for people. I totally acknowledge that this is going to be a difficult transition, and we have to provide for that along the way. So I would just say to you, I would say that let's start to think about what some of those interesting areas are, whether, and as you guys, as you're starting to think about college and thinking about, where you might go next, these are great, these are great industries to be part of. And whether you're part of the traditional industry or new industry, getting those skills and transferring those skills to new things are I think what you should be focused on. So I think that those are kind of some of the things I would leave you with. Houston has a real opportunity to be successful in the new energy economy, and it's something we ought to embrace, not be afraid of. But we also ought to recognize that the road won't be necessarily easy at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I was actually parsing through your all's websites, and so I wanted to tell all the students in this call, please check out the Center for Houston's Futures website. They have a lot of great information, on all of these trends that Mr. Perlman just talked about. There's some more in-depth stuff. So if you're interested about any of the industries, which we all should be because they're going to be directly affecting us, take a look at it, check it out. And I think, Miss Karen put something about data science. I think I would definitely, retweet that, stamp, whatever it is that, I think that's a really important field, and, a lot of people are probably going to be employed in that in the future. So
yeah. Yeah. And I've just put my my email in the chat. If you want to talk more, I'm always happy to do that, and keep the discussion going.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Pullman. We really appreciate you spending your time with us on Saturday.
Okay. Very good. Well, good luck on your presentations, and thank you for listening to me for a few minutes. And let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to email me if you want to keep talking.
Thank you.